Hi everybody, it's Casey of Upcycled Island, and today I want to welcome you to part 4 of our series Upcycling Jeans. In part 1 we deconstructed a pair of jeans. In part 2 we made a little double pocket bag out of the back pockets of those jeans. In part 3 we made this little fringe bag. And here today in part 4, we're going to make a tote bag. And we're going to use the leg that we have left to make that tote bag. Here I have the leg of those jeans, and I'm lining up the seam so that the seam is lined up on both sides, and I can just feel with my fingers that that's all lined up. Now I want my bag to be symmetrical, so from this seam to this edge is 7 inches. So I'm going to line up make sure my seam is lined up, and then I'm going to cut so I have 7 inches. Now I have a rotary cutter and a ruler, and I can cut it that way. But if you're a beginner, you don't have that perhaps, but you do have a pair of scissors, I'm sure. So we're going to mark where we're going to cut with chalk. And then here, we're going to line up that 7 inches from the seam to this edge. Make a mark, and now we're going to mark that edge. And then we're going to cut it with the scissors. And I'm just cutting through both layers. And then the other side, we're going to cut that. And keep those scraps. We're going to use those later. All right, now I need to make sure that it's even this way. So at about the half mark here, I'm going to this mark across the top, and then I'm going to cut that so it's even across the top. When you get to that seam, you might have to go one layer at a time. It's a little thick. And then you can cut the 2 layers at once again. So, save that scrap. You might need it. And I have this seam. This is a serge seam, so the underside of the serge seam is not tacked down. And I'm going to do that now. I'm simply going to do a stitch beside the seam line where that serged material is, serge part of the seam, and I'm just going to tack that down. Here we are at the machine, and I'm going to place the leg under the machine, and I'm going to stitch this seam, this serged edge down. You can see the stitch line on that serged edge, and I'm going to use that as my guide. I'm going to place the inside edge of my presser foot on that line, so I'll be stitching just a little bit to the left of it. Just a simple task. When we're making our bag, this seam being tacked down will be of benefit as we're making the bag. And that's all there is to that. All right, we have tacked down that serge seam so it's not going to have any movement and cause any unnecessary bulk. We fold that over and we're going to have a pretty nice sized bag. Before I seam up the edges, I think every bag needs at least one pocket. This is going to be a tote bag like you would take to the grocery store or shopping, or you can even carry it as a handbag. And I've got a pocket, since I have a big stash. Once you get to upcycling quite a bit, you'll have these little extras. And so I'm going to put that pocket on the front of these jeans, and I'm just kind of eyeballing it. The point of the bottom of that pocket I have on the seam, lined up with the seam in the middle. And then I'm going to pin that. And since I have it folded over, I don't want my pins to go through both layers. So I just put my ruler underneath there, and I pin on the inside of the pocket, not on the edges, because we don't want to have to be moving pins while we're sewing. And then one on the bottom for good measure. And then we're going to sew that on. Now, whenever I do a pocket, I make 2 lines of stitching. So we're just going to follow the stitching that was on the original pocket. We're going to stitch around the edge, all around the edge, and then we're going to use the second stitch line that was on the original pocket, and we're going to stitch along that. Let's go do that. We're ready to sew on our pocket. Make sure you only have 1 layer of your bag. And I sew from the right side over, just because that's how I roll. And I'm going to start on this outside. And I'm going to lower my needle manually until it's just touching the edge of the top of the pocket. I have my stitch length on 3. I have all-purpose thread in the machine. It's a Gutermann all-purpose thread. I use color number 233. And I'm gonna take a couple of stitches. It'll be a little thick right there because The original pocket has fold overs and everything, so it's a little thick right there. So back stitch, and I do that 2 or 3 times because there's lots of wear and tear on a pocket when you put things in and out of it. And then we're just going to follow this original stitch line of the pocket. And we're at a corner. We leave the needle down, pull up the presser foot, and turn your fabric, and then continue on, following that original stitch line. Needle down, turn your fabric, press the foot back down, and continue on. Same thing, needle down, turn your fabric. We're going to get back up here, and there's going to be some thickness, so just go slow. And we're doing that a couple of times to secure that. Clip your threads, and then we're going to do it again, this time on the inside of the original stitching of that pocket, this line right here. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to lower our needle until it just touches the top of that pocket. And then we're going to stitch back and forth a couple of times. And then continue on stitching along that line. You have a guide, so this makes it go fast. We're at the corner, needle down, press your foot up, turn, press your foot down, go. This is good practice for turning corners. Strength, and we are done adding that pocket. I'm going to clip our threads. We have our pocket attached to the bag. When we sew it together, it's going to look like that. Now, we're going to sew it together. You will put right sides together, and then you're going to sew along the edges. Now, when I make an unlined tote bag out of denim, I like to finish my edges because it's not going to have a lining, and there can be quite a bit of fray on denim once you wash your bag. And I want to eliminate as much of that fraying as I can. So I'm going to serge the edges of this piece. I'm going to serge the entire thing, the edges. If you don't have a serger, that's fine. you can use a zigzag stitch and just zigzag on the edge, and that will help eliminate the fray also. There's also a product called Fray Check, and you can put that along the edges, and it looks wet, but once it's dry, it is clear and you can't even see it. So that's another way to help eliminate fraying. I have finished serging the edges all around this piece, the top and the sides and the other end. So that's all serged. Now we're ready to seam the sides together. So we're simply going to put it pretty sides together, and we're going to line up the top edge and the side edges and pin. Now you can use sewing clips or binder clips if you'd rather use those. I like to use pins and pin far enough from the edge that there's room for my presser foot to move. This keeps my fabric lined up perfectly, and I can just seam it without having to stop. If I use clips, sometimes when I let the clip go, it can slip, and you sew and move a clip and sew and move a clip. This way I have the pins there, and I can just sew continuously without having to stop. Now I'm starting at the top, so my pins are going this way. I'm going to flip it over to pin the other side, so my pins are going in the same direction. Lining up the top edge and the side edges, and pinning far enough away from the side that there's room for my presser foot to pass. And I'm putting in 3 pins. I'm big on pinning. Some people can sew without pinning. Power to them. I'm not one of those. I need to pin. So I'm going to got some tails, thread tails that I'm going to clip off. And then we're going to go seam this up. We're ready to seam up the sides of our bag. I have it at the machine, and I want to have a decent size seam because I want to press the seam open. So I'm going to use the 1/2 inch mark on my machine as my guide. I'm going to place the edge of the fabric on that 1/2 inch mark. I'm going to start at the top, make sure my thread is behind the project, and then we're going to start at the edge, take a few stitches, backspace, backspace, back stitch, and go. Keep that edge lined up with my 1/2 inch mark. Stitch at the end to set your stitches. Then we're going to do that on the other side. Starting at the edge, lining up my fabric on the 1/2 inch mark. I have my stitch length on 3, and I use the all-purpose thread. Back stitch to set your stitches. And just continue sewing with your edge of your fabric lined up. Mine is on the 1/2 inch mark of my machine. And at the end, set your stitches with the back stitch. Clip your threads. It is seamed up. We have seamed up the sides and we're removing the pins. And now we're going to square up the bottom of the bag. We want it to have a little depth. So to do that, since I don't have a bottom seam, I'm going to use my chalk to just mark along the bottom of that seam so I can tell where a seam line would be if I had a bottom seam. And I just need that so I can line up along so I can know where the center of the bottom of the bag is. So I'm sticking my hand in the bag, and this is the side seam. And I'm opening that side seam, and I'm making a little triangle. And I want to get that side seam so it's in the middle. And the reason I did that chalk line is I put a pin through the middle of that seam, and on the other side, see, it's lined up with that chalk line. So I know that it's centered. The seam is centered here in my little triangle. And I'm going to place a pin to hold that triangle in place. And just for good measure, I'm going to put another couple of pins so that won't move on me. And then we're going to do that on the other side. Why are we doing this, you say? We're doing it so we'll have a square to the bottom of the bag. And once we sew this, you'll understand. Okay, I've made my triangle. I've opened my seam. I'm testing to see if I'm in the center by placing a pin through that seam, pretty close to that chalk line. So I'm placing my pins in again to keep the shape of that triangle so it won't move on me. Okay, this is what it looks like with our pins in it. Now, I want this bag to be like 3 inches deep. So to get that 3 inches, I'm going to cut that, divide that in 2, and that 1.5 inch. So we're going to take our triangle, and I line it up on a grid. You can just use a ruler. And I'm going to measure, use a smaller ruler, 1.5 inch from this point of our triangle. And so 1.5 inches, and I'm going to make a mark with my chalk. And then I'm going to place my ruler right here. And I'm going to make my mark go all the way across. So I've got a mark all the way across. Then we're going to do that on the other side. we're going to line up the point of our triangle on one of my grid lines or on your ruler, whichever will work for you. Measure 1.5 inches. Make your line. Then use your ruler to make your line. That's your guide. We're going to sew across that line. We're going to sew across this line, and that's going to square up the bottom of your bag. Let's go do that, and I'll show you what it looks like. Okay, we're ready to square up the bottom of the bag. I have my corner, that triangle, under my machine at the chalk mark that we made. And we're going to sew across that mark. Take up the stitches, back stitch to set your stitches, and sew across that line. Set your stitches. Now for good measure, I go back the other way. Needle down, press your foot up, turn your fabric, because I want 2 stitch lines. So just follow your first stitch line. Set your stitches and clip your threads. We're going to do the same thing on the other side. There's my chalk line. I'm going to sew across that. Set my stitches, needle down, turn my fabric, and follow that original stitch line. And that's it. We're ready. We're done. We have finished sewing our little triangles. Take our pins out. And now we're going to show you why you did that. Turn your bag right side out and push your fingers on the bottom of the bag where you sewed that little triangle, and you squared up the bottom of your bag. So now your bag has depth. That's what it looks like from the bottom. That's what it looks like from the side. The next step is to hem the top. Before we do that, we're going to press our seams. We're going to press our seams open. You want the seam to sit as flat as possible. So we're going to press that open. I have pressed the seam open so it's nice and flat. I'm going to turn it back right sides out. Get my bottom pushed out. And now we're ready to hem the top of the bag. I want to put a 1-inch hem on this bag. And I've got that little hammer that I'm going to use. And I put it on 1 inch. If you don't have one of these, put it on your list of things to get. They're very handy. And you measure like so. And you're going to do that all around your bag. And I'm going to use pins on the hem on the edge here. So I'm going to pin it like this. So my pin is down here. The reason I'm pinning it and putting my pins on that serged edge or zigzagged edge or fray checked edge, however you decided to do yours, is because once I get it pinned all the way around, I'm going to press it. I'm going to press the heck out of it because I want it to lie flat. I want the crease to be there, so when I'm messing with putting the straps on it, it won't keep coming undone. It'll be pressed. I'll be able to tell how it is going to lay. So I'm going to go ahead and measure and pin this all the way around, and we'll go from there. I know you all know how to press, and so I'm not being sarcastic or anything, but I'm going to show you how I do it. I have a steam iron. I have it on steam, and so I have it set on the hottest setting. For the hottest setting is cotton and then linen. And I've got my pins. I pinned it all the way around. And so I'm going to put it on. I have this little thing. I see these at the thrift store all the time. So if you see one, pick it up. It's like a little mini ironing board for sleeves and things like that, but it's pretty handy. So I put that on that so my pins are on the inside and I won't melt the little ball on the pins. And I'm just going to press that edge, just press it like crazy and turn. And there's not a big surface on this little board, but it doesn't have a padding on it. It just has the cover on it. So it presses real well. So if you see one of these at the thrift shop, it is worth picking it up. And so I'm just pressing the heck out of the edge of the top of this bag that we've pinned. So it will have a nice crease, and you can work with putting the straps on without having to have all of those pins in place. We have that steam ironed, so we have a nice crisp edge. See, I just stuck my finger. That's why I want to do this. So we can take the pins out and won't be sticking ourselves all afternoon. So I'm taking my pins out because I have pressed that in such a way that it has that nice crisp edge to it. And it's going to stay in place. So even when you unfold it, you can see the edge. Now we're ready to put the straps on it. If it were a lined purse, had several layers of a heavier fabric, we would put the straps on the sides. But this is one layer of denim. It doesn't have a whole lot of body. It's kind of flaccid. So we want to put two straps on this bag And that seam that we cut out on the day that we deconstructed, we're going to use that as your straps. We're going to have double straps. The hem on that, we're going to cut that off because that's way too thick to use. And then in the middle, there's a middle seam that's real thick. We're going to cut that off. And then the other end has the thickness from the hem. So we have our seam that we're going to use as the handles on this bag. And one's a little bit longer than the other one, so we'll just even that up. So we have these two. And these are now each about 28 inches long. So it'll be a shoulder bag. Now, where do we place those straps? We want them to be like midway between the center seam and the side seam. Excuse me. And if we look at our pocket, the inside stitching that we did on this pocket right here is about center. So we can use that as a guide. So on the inside, I'm going to use my handy little chalk, and I'm going to make a mark at the serged edge where I want that handle to go, that strap to go. I'll do the same thing. Just fold over the hem, and where it lines up with that seam, with that stitch line on your pocket, just make a line on that serged edge, or zigzagged or fray-checked edge. And then you'll be able to do the same thing because you have it folded this way. You can now mark the other side, the other edge of the other side of the top of the bag at the same time, and they'll be lined up. Now we're going to place the strap on the inside of the fold, all the way to the fold line. Fold it over. So your strap is up inside the fold, and then you're going to fold your strap over that and clip it. You can use a pin if you don't have clips. Remember, if you don't have sewing clips, you can use binder clips. So you have to put your clip a little cattywampus to hold it in place. Then you're going to do the same thing on, this is the front of the bag. You're going to pull your strap up so it's not twisted. Place it under the fold like you did before. So it's under the fold, and then you're going to fold the strap up over that fold and place your clip. So that's what it looks like. We're going to do the same thing on the other side because we made those chalk marks. So we're going to do the same thing with the other strap, the other seam that we're using as a strap. We've tucked it under, we've tucked it over, and clipped. And then the same thing for this side. The reason we do it this way, we fold it under the fold and then over the fold. We're catching both layers each time we're going to sew, and that makes that strap really, really strong. It's not coming off. We're going to take it to the machine and we're going to do 2 lines of stitching. We're going to stitch close to the edge all the way around, and so we'll be stitching over those straps all the way around, and then we're going to do a second line of stitching further down, and that's going to further strengthen the hem and the straps in place. We are ready to sew. I have my stitch length on 3. I have all-purpose thread in the machine. I checked my bobbin, thank goodness, because I was almost out of bobbin. And when I'm doing the top stitching on the top of a bag, I do not want to run out of bobbin. So thankfully, I checked and I changed my bobbin. So this is a good time to check your bobbin. Make sure you have enough thread so you won't run out at a critical time. I am starting at the side seam. This is the flap. This is the hem at the top of the bag. And I'm just going to start sewing at the side seam. And I have the edge of the top of the bag, and I'm using my presser foot as a guide. So about the middle of this side of the presser foot is along this edge. That's what I'm using as my guide. You can use the edge of your presser foot on the edge of the fabric if you want to do it that way. Your presser foot is probably different than mine, so just find a way. There are special presser feet for this purpose that has a little edge that goes along. If you have one of those, use that. And we're just going to start. We're going to take a couple of stitches and back stitch to set that, and then we're just going to sew till we get to this strap. Now this strap is going to be a little heavy, a little thick, so we're going to ease that presser foot over it. You may have to raise your presser foot and fix it. And keep your edge of your foot lined up on the edge of the fabric like you started, so it'll all look the same. And we're over that strap. And this is the reason we pressed this so well, is I don't have a bunch of pins or clips that I have to remove. I can just keep going. Just finesse that foot over your strap. Make sure, excuse me, that your strap is out of the way as you're sewing. You don't want it under here and then inadvertently sew over the strap the wrong way. So be careful and keep your strap out of the way when you're sewing. I have done that a couple of times and said bad words. So there's another strap going over. And I think this is the last of the straps that we're going over. Now, here's the beginning thread piece. Some people clip that thread as soon as they get past it. I leave it there because it shows me where I started, and that's where I'm going to end this line of stitching. Sometimes this thread matches so good, so well, that I can't see where I started. So I keep those thread tails, but I have to move them out of the way. Okay, we've gotten to our starting point. And we're going to clip all of our threads. Okay. Now we're going to do our second line of stitching. I'm going to start again at a side seam. I'm going to clip those threads a little better. Excuse my fingers in the way. And I want this line of stitching to be further in. So I'm going to use, again, the 1/2 inch mark on my machine and run the edge of the top of the bag along that 1/2 inch mark. That way my stitching will be even all the way around. And we're going to go all the way around the bag again. Finessing when we get to the straps. Keeping my eye on the edge of the bag and that 1/2 inch mark. So my stitching will be even all the way around. Keep those straps out of the way so you won't go over them at the wrong place. Finesse that strap. Now here my fabric wants to get tied up on that pressure foot. I keep tweezers at my machine for times such as this. Those things are going to happen. Okay, here we are back at the beginning. There's my thread tails. I want those out of the way. Sew it off. Back stitch to set those stitches and clip your threads. We are done. And here's your tote bag. It has a nice handle on it so you can carry it on your shoulder. It has a pocket so you can put your phone in there or your coupons. We gave it depth when we did the corners of the bag. So you have a nice, very nice tote bag that you can carry as a purse or for when you go to the drugstore or the grocery store. You have a nice tote bag. It's sturdy. We sewed 2 layers of stitching, 2 rows of stitching around the top to secure the straps to make attractive top stitching. 2 for 1, strength and prettiness. So there's your tote bag. We have another project that we're going to make out of the jeans that you deconstructed, and maybe we can get another project after that one. We'll see. So keep all of your scraps. We may need them. I'll see you next time. Stay safe.